You're listening to Unjiggered, a bartender podcast where we interview highly successful bartenders about their careers, lives, and the passion of bartending. This week we caught up with Luke Whearty, the owner of the new Melbourne-based bar Birdie, as well as one of the key figures behind the 23rd Best Bar in the World 2018, Operation Dagger. Michele and Luke chat about Birdie, Operation Dagger, Melbourne, and what it's like to be pushing the boundary of what defines a bar and a cocktail. With this podcast, we want to peel back the mask and discover just how the greats really became the greats. So sit back and enjoy.
Hi, I'm Luke Whearty. I'm the owner of the soon-to-open Birdie in Melbourne.
Thank you for finding the time to sit down with us. It's great to have you over.
Thanks for having me.
Melbourne is such an awesome city.
It's really cool. It's a very easy, I always say it's an easy city to live in. It's especially after traveling the world, over the last, say, 10, 15 years with my job. It's become home for me. It's not, it actually, I wasn't born here. I'm sort of from a small town up north, but coming back to Melbourne now, it's home. It's really cool.
I noticed that the quality of ingredients here is fantastic. I've tried some of the restaurants and the produce is just unbelievable.
Yeah, it's really cool. Australia in general, we've got amazing produce from, fruit and vegetables to seaweed, seafood, not seaweed, although we do have good seaweed.
Does seaweed classify as seafood?
That's a good question. Not for me though. You might have to ask a horticulturist or something. But yeah, even like down to all the native indigenous stuff that we've got growing here is really cool. There's a lot of stuff that literally doesn't grow anywhere in the world, so it's quite a special place.
You're about to open a bar here in Melbourne. I think You've been working it for quite a while. However, we all know you for Operation Dagger, but it was such a radical concept, at least for Singapore at the time. What I've always been curious is, how did you get to open that, and when did you come up with the idea for Operation Dagger?
I guess Operation Dagger was probably it wasn't one idea that really came to fruition. It was probably the amalgamation of, 5, 6, 7, 8 different ideas over the course of a few different years. But I guess I had the opportunity to go to Singapore through Ryan Clift from Tippling Club, the head chef and owner there. And I met him, I think it was back in 2009, working a little bit at Tippling Club. Fast forward to, I think it was 2013 we opened. Ryan sort of reached out to me and sort of found out that I was, leaving my bar in the place that I was working in Melbourne, and I wanted to do something different. And long story short, he introduced me to my business partners for Operation Dagger. I just went over, and to be honest, there was a little bit of like luck involved. Like this was before the explosion of bars in Singapore, so we got very lucky in that sense as well. But I guess at the end of the day, we wanted to just open something that was different. And I guess Singapore for me at that point in time was like really ready for something to come in and do something completely different. There was established bars like 28 Hong Kong Street that had really laid the groundwork, and I have to mention Tippling Club as well. Tippling Club are very progressive and were back in 2009, but Singapore in a lot of ways probably wasn't ready for that yet. The scene had to catch up, and now 10 years later, I think that probably shows you how progressive Tippling Club was, because 10 years later, Singapore's finally caught up to it. So it's quite a statement. So I always have to say Tippling Club, laid that foundation. And then, it enabled us to, it was a lot easier for us to go in and do something that was probably a bit of a risk. Would have been a lot more of a risk a few years before that.
Where were you working in Melbourne?
So I was at a bar called Durham. I was there for about 5 years, and that was kind of back then, it's closed now. Back then that was seen as like one of the most progressive bars in the world, definitely for Melbourne. And that was kind of, that bar introduced me to sort of looking at things a little bit differently, I guess. And so before that, I was working in a lot of like just restaurant bars in my hometown, and I was only learning what I was teaching myself, I guess.
Okay.
And so that was why I came to Melbourne back then, was basically I literally Googled Australia's best bar and that came up. And
Really?
because I got to a point where I was like, I wasn't learning anything. So I was like, I have to go somewhere where everyone is like much better than me. And that's what I did. And then within like a year or two, I was the head bartender. And it was really cool for me to be in an environment where I was learning something all the time. And I think I really thrive in an environment like that. And and the rest is history, I guess. I've moved on from there and then Singapore and now back home.
What made you fall in love with hospitality or decide that this was your career path?
There's one thing actually that I get asked this question all the time, and it is actually one thing that I really love about it. And I think it's one of the only industries where you can make something physically with your hands and you give it to a customer and you instantly get that gratification. You instantly see the effect. You instantly see the joy it brings someone. And I think there's not many industries in the world that you get that instant gratification. So for me, that was like really cool. Like the creative side of it is what I really enjoy, but, also that instant gratification. And it's something that I've missed over the last couple of years, not being behind the bar so much actually. So I'm actually looking forward to being back in Melbourne behind the bar all the time because you get that instant gratification. At the moment in the last couple of years with Singapore, I'm not behind the bar all the time. So I have to really make sure I'm communicating with my team all the time on, do people like this drink? Do they not? Because sometimes I think, maybe I'm getting a bit too crazy. Maybe people are going to hate it. And I have to say, do people like it? Because I don't know. I'm not in the bar every night. So, yeah, that's the one thing I love about bartending.
So how did you go about opening Operation Dagger? Because first of all, it's a completely different country. So.
Yeah, which was a huge challenge. I had an introduction to Singapore back in 2009 with Tipman Club and working with Ryan. So I knew a little bit of what to expect, but even in saying that, it was very challenging. It was very hard. I'm not going to sugarcoat it at all. I've actually, I say all the time now that I've opened a bar in Singapore, I feel like I can open a bar anywhere
in the world.
Yeah. But in saying that, Singapore's really changed a lot as well in the last 5 years. So I think a lot of the challenges that I faced back then aren't really challenges anymore. But that's the price to pay to be one of the first people opening in these areas.
So what were the challenges that you described?
The biggest one I would say would be it was just the culture. And I'm not talking about, the culture of the country in terms of we're in Asia, so people eat different food and that sort of thing. It was more like the culture around hospitality wasn't established in Singapore. So to try and convince, young people in Singapore that hospitality and bartending is like a job worth their time was quite a challenge because, and this is something that's changed a lot. And I'd like to think Operation Dagger has contributed to the changing of this culture because I think the younger guys can see, actually, I can work for, these bars and then they're recognized on these lists like the 50 best bars and that sort of thing. And there's that, like I talk about that instant gratification, they're getting gratification themselves. Whereas I think before that, there was just a lot of, I don't want to say substandard bars, but bars that weren't really teaching them anything. They weren't really doing anything other than, trying to make money for the owner of the bar, So I think there was that stigma around bartending and working in the service industry was seen as like a bad thing. So it was quite hard to get the right people in Singapore. And again, like I got very lucky. I've had some really great staff in Singapore. I still do. One staff member in particular, Sasha, who's been with me since we opened, and she's still there. She's the head bartender there now. She started with us when she was 19. Back then, even talking about her personal experience, like she actually, I don't know if she likes me talking about this too much, but her own father, really didn't like the fact that she was working in the service industry and said, I don't want you to do this and really made life hard for her at that point in time. But she stuck with it, and now her parents come to the bar and they're really proud of her. So that, I guess that's sort of an example of where the mentality, the mindset and the culture was, and it's changed so much. So yeah, that was a big challenge for me because I've more or less grown up in this industry. So I started out washing dishes for kitchens and restaurants and then working my way up. And for someone that, a younger guy or girl coming to me saying, well, no, I'm too good for this, I don't want to do this job. I want to only learn the top end of the scale. I don't want to have to do the hard work. That doesn't sit very well with someone like me, So you can imagine there was some frustrating times there. But I think we stuck to our guns. We wanted to do something different, and we delivered that. And I think our staff really welcomed that in the end.
How did you try? So what were the things that you did in order to retain staff?
A big one for me was a big one that I think made a huge difference was myself and my wife, Aki. We were in the bar working shifts every single day. We weren't the traditional bar owners where we were sitting at home just watching the P&L report. We were in there every day. I would take out the bins. I would mop the floors. I would do the cash up. I would make the drinks because I wanted to set an example of that we're all working together as a team. I think that really was something that I was very conscious about. And it's something that I'm just like, I'm very passionate about myself. I feel like the best way to lead is by example. So, you open up the avenue for them to learn off you as well. You're there when things go wrong. You're there when things go right. You're there at the end of the shift having a beer or, that's when everyone's guard is let down and, they can ask you questions and it's a little bit more of a real interaction rather than that boss-worker relationship. But it was something that I think, especially like local Singaporeans, they found it hard to relate. Even just calling me boss, I hate people calling me boss.
I hate it too, yeah. But it's such a big thing in that, is it?
It is, especially in Asian culture. It was so that was one thing instantly. I was like, don't call me boss. My name's Luke. I'll call you by your name. And it was something that we had to shift the culture a little bit. And we said it a few times, like down in Operation Dagger, we were like, this isn't anywhere. It's Operation Dagger. It's its own place in itself. It's not Singapore. It's not Australia. It's where it's escape from the rest of the world because that's what we wanted the bar to be for customers as well. But I also wanted it to be for staff. And once they clicked into that mentality and they got that, it was really cool to see them respond to that. And it was, the way they were down in Operation Dagger was completely different to how they felt like they needed to portray themselves on the outside world. Because Singapore is a very strict society in a lot of ways. And I think it's quite suppressive in a lot of ways, to be honest. Whereas I think we offered a bit of an escape from that and they really responded well to it.
I just think that also touching on that is that, as you said, you've got this figure which is like the boss or owner or manager or whatever. And then, staff are almost like afraid to talk to this person, right? Or you make it like, but then this creates this avenue whereby as a owner or a manager, you get very little feedback from your team. And then you've got people that end up having issues that they can never.
Oh, totally. Like communication is the key to any successful business or any successful, not even just business. If you just talk about teams, communication is a key. Even if you talk about, I always do a lot of my degree in university is psychology. So I'm always I'm very interested in the psychology behind teamwork and that sort of thing and group dynamics. And I always make similar sort of comparisons to, sports teams. If you have a football team, say, that doesn't talk to each other on the field, and they're
doomed
playing
for failure, yeah, of course.
Yeah, exactly. So it's the same thing in a bar. You have to have that communication, and more importantly, just open up those avenues for communication.
Talking about Singapore, when you joined, you mentioned that there were a few bars that sort of paved the road for other bars like yours to succeed. However, I'm sure there was still a genuine lack of training in hospitality. How did you try to overcome that gap, given the fact that some of the techniques that you use in your bar are quite, especially at the time, they were quite forward?
Yeah. To be honest, that was the easy part because we were doing things so different. People didn't really have a basis for comparison, or because it was so different, we were starting their training day one. You know what I mean? So For me, I actually prefer it that way. I prefer training people that have zero experience because, quite often if you've worked in 5 or 6 bars all around the world and that sort of thing, sometimes you might develop, you first might develop some bad habits that, that are really hard to get rid of. But then also, let's say talking about using these modern gadgets like rotary evaporators, that sort of thing. There's different ways to use them, and so if you've learnt one way, then it's a lot harder to teach another. Whereas with the guys at Dagger, they were very fresh, very young, and they were just willing to learn. So it was super easy actually to train new things, because it was like, okay, this is a traditional bar and this is what that looks like, but we're doing something over here that's completely different from that. So all you need to do is focus on this. And obviously, we still wanted to give classic training and knowledge, because I believe it's important to know that. But there was bars like, 28 Hong Kong Street that were doing that so well, it didn't make sense for me to do that. So it opened up the door to do something really different. So yeah, training-wise, that actually was the easy part.
And talking about the Operation Dagger menu itself, I think one of the very curious bits is the natural wine section. Have you had that from the very beginning?
More or less, yeah. We were fermenting things right from the start, but we didn't necessarily have a section of the menu. No, actually we did. Yeah, we did. Yeah, it was just we had... this is testing my memory now. But going back to the first menu, I think there was like maybe 5 or 6 drinks. Like cocktails, mixed drinks, and then we had a section of the menu that was called House Brew. That's right. So we had different things like that we were playing around with fermentation-wise. So I think the first thing that we started playing around was mead. So we're getting some local honey and then fermenting that. And that was something that Aki, my wife, took as her own personal project. And I think that first mead that we fermented, we sold out of it within 2 months. But that first mead that we fermented, we're still trying to chase that result.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
You cannot?
Nah, for whatever reason, it's never been as good. I mean, it's still been good, but the first mead that she did was, it was amazing. It had the complexity of like some amazing French wines like you get from, the region of Jura, those oxidized sort of style wines that was really complex, nutty, and still had acidity. It was amazing.
You can't get it
I wish I
back.
still had a bottle of it. It's quite frustrating, but beautiful at the same time. But that section of the menu, fermenting, came actually from us being in Singapore, and it actually came from a restriction. When I went back to Singapore, because I was used to the produce and the seasons rotating all the time in Melbourne, I went to Singapore and all of a sudden that was taken away from me. There's one frustration of mine with Singapore has always been that there's nothing really grown in Singapore. It's all imported. Even if it's grown, close by to Malaysia, it's still, technically imported, right? And the seasons, there's no seasons in Singapore. There's one season and it's hot.
And humid.
Yeah, humid. And so we instead of looking at that as a restriction, we tried to use that as to our advantage. So the menus became a little bit more free-flowing. We weren't restricted by the season, so we could get anything we wanted imported from anywhere. But then I wanted to do something that was still, a little bit more localized and made by us. So that's when I started looking into fermentation. And then the mead was the first thing that really we looked at. And Singapore actually has the perfect climate for fermentation because it's steady temperature all the time. So especially down where we've got the little fermentation bank in under the stairs in Operation Dagger, it's like a consistent 20 degrees all year round.
That's awesome.
So it's just perfect for fermenting. So yeah, it kind of came from that.
So talking about the menu in Operation Dagger, how did you drive creativity?
So it's one thing that we've done since we opened. We have for the staff 1 day a week where we have a creative session. So it's basically a dedicated 2 hours before we open the bar that the guys can focus on anything they want. If they want to sit down and read a book, they can. If they want to work on a drink that they've been working on, that's the time to do it. And that, for me, is something that I'll carry on to Birdie in Melbourne. It was always really important for me as a bartender when I was learning, was having a dedicated time to focus on something. Because otherwise, when do you find time? And quite often, it just is that, whenever you find time. So it's like you will make a customer a drink, and then you go back to working on your drink, And I find that it's one of my pet hates when I go to a bar and there's a bartender in the bar, not necessarily serving the guests. He's working on a new drink he's coming up with, or sometimes it's a drink for a competition or whatever. It's like that to me just says, you're disorganized. Service is for service. And then, so that's why we set aside this time and we call it a creative session. So they're not focusing on anything else. It's just 100% creativity. I think to be creative, you have to also be very organized as well. There's a set time for prep, there's a set time for service, and there's a set time for developing new drinks. And then outside of that, I don't need any real motivation to sort of come up with new things, because it's just what I love to do. So everyone's different. Some people really need that sort of push and motivation, and some of my staff would ask me a lot of questions and want me to be really involved. Other staff, they would just be happy going on their own. Other staff really respond well to maybe going outside of the bar and, seeing a new process, like going to visit a bakery or a brewery, or, doing off-site things like that. And when we've had like people like Matt Wiley and Alex Cretenia come down and do like-minded creatures at the first one that we did in Singapore, I know that a lot of the staff really found that amazing to work right close with those guys. Some people aren't, to be honest, some people aren't interested in creativity. Some people are very, linear and want to focus a little bit more on operations, and maybe they want to focus more on the human side of things and focus on guests and service and that sort of thing. That's great too. I think to be a bartender at the moment, there's a lot of pressure to be really creative, whereas you don't have to be, that shouldn't be your one and only focus. If you just like serving people, making people happy, that's a good enough reason as well.
Absolutely. And it's a skill as well.
And it also goes down to, some people are really good with numbers. I'm terrible with numbers. So I love it when someone comes along and says, yeah, I just love doing a spreadsheet,
Yeah, my guy.
Great. Yeah. But some people really love it. And, I think I always try and encourage, I think creativity goes, it's multifaceted. So you can be creative with a spreadsheet as well.
Absolutely, yeah.
I try and encourage whatever avenue they want to be creative with, I'll try and encourage that.
But, one of the things that I've noticed is that if you dedicate time for creativity and putting down ideas on pieces of paper, not 100% of the ideas are relevant or compatible with what you're doing in that specific stage of your career. So how do you keep people motivated? Because if you get a couple of ideas bounced back every now and then, must be quite painful for a member of staff to deal with it, right?
Yeah, I think my big one is, as long as it's recorded, I think there'll always be a time for it, and I'll often say to people, I've had ideas that I just, I'm working on for maybe 2 or 3 years. I record it up until a certain point, and that's the strength of recording it, is you can then put it away and you can forget about it because it's recorded, so you can go back to that at any point and you can pick up where you left off. If you don't record it, then you're going to forget it. Well, I know I will, and then all that work that you've already put into it is just lost. So I always encourage people to be like, okay, if you've got 5 or 6 ideas, that's great. Write them all down, but then choose to work on one until you'll get to a fork in the road and you don't really know which way you want to go. Don't rush it. Put it away, sleep on it for a week, a month, a year, and then come back to it. And then that way the ideas and the creativity is going to be a lot more organic rather than forced. I think a lot of the time there's, some people try and force an idea too much and it ends up developing into something that was really far removed from their original idea. Whereas this way, it's a lot more sort of not as much pressure.
Talking a bit more about from human perspective, how was it to work with your wife? Because a lot of people hate it.
Yeah, easy for me, I can honestly say. And I'm not just saying that because I'm worried that she'll hear this. And no, super easy. Aki and I are very similar, but also very different at the same time. And I think we know each other's strengths and weaknesses too well. I mean, for example, something like this, doing a podcast, that's Aki's worst nightmare.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah. So in terms of running a business, not just Operation Dagger, but any brand, a lot of the time, needs a face to the brand and needs someone that, the spotlight is on. And, Aki was always quite happy for me to be that person. There was one frustration of mine that I always had, that she never gets the credit that she deserves. And so that's why I'm always bringing her up. If I've ever got the opportunity, I'll bring her name up because, yeah, she's very talented in terms of everything, in terms of food and drink. But yeah, she just doesn't like the spotlight, so it's kind of, she shies away from that. But it's perfect for us, so I'll do that sort of thing, and then she's happy to be behind the scenes working on this, that, the other. Because she was very task-minded, that enabled me to spend a little bit more time with staff, spend a little bit more time with guests. Otherwise, I would probably, especially in the opening days, I would have been stuck just doing prep and all the operational side of things that she took care of. And yeah, it's easy. It works really well, but I'm under no disillusion that we're very lucky. Yeah, it's I get asked that question a lot because especially people that are married, they're just like, how do you do that? Like, I think a lot of people enjoy their job because it's an escape from their wife or something like that.
No, but yeah, also gives you more things to talk about when you go home, right? And like, I don't know, I find it that if you spend 24/7 with the same person, after a while you kind of run out of things to talk about, right? I don't know.
Yeah, we'd never really had that. I think the key, I think with Aki and I, we're comfortable with being, in the same room and being silent. So yeah, that's never been an issue. We have the same interests, but at the same time, we've got, enough things on our own that we're interested in. And yeah, I think it's, put it this way, it's never really been something that we've had to really work hard at.
Then if it's natural, it's perfect.
Exactly, yeah. So no, it's great, and I'm actually really looking forward to when we open in Melbourne. We're actually going to be working together again, which is great. We're just working out the logistics of that, trying to get childcare and everything for Bronny first, but I'm sure it'll work out.
So let's talk about South Africa.
Yeah.
How did that come about?
Amazing. Literally came from just a guy came to the bar and really loved Operation Dagger. He owned a bar in South Africa already and had a new space and wanted to open something, and sort of floated the idea to me. And it was just sort of perfect timing for me that Dagger was established. I had a really good, strong team in there. I wasn't so much needed on a day-to-day basis to be there all the time.
So hold on, after how many years of Dagger being open did this opportunity come up?
This was after 2 years.
Okay.
Yeah. That's when we started looking at, both Aki and I started the conversation of coming back home and opening a bar. Because Dagger was, a little bit more self-sustainable. So we're already thinking that, and we've sort of started putting that concept in motion and what eventually became Birdie. But then the opportunity with South Africa came about, and it was just a really cool opportunity. First of all, I'd never been to South Africa. So a lot of people I say this to, and they're like, are you crazy? You decided to open a bar and you'd never been there before? and yeah, exactly. That's exactly what I did. It was a pretty big risk. My first time in South Africa was, going to open the bar, for opening week.
That's crazy.
Yeah. But I kind of enjoyed that. It was, it was fun. It was a bit of a risk, but, there was a lot of things that I loved about it. But the biggest thing was we went back there, and all of a sudden there was a familiarity about the place in terms of I was back having seasons and local produce and working around, different chefs and bartenders and baristas that all had the same interest. And there's a really cool, young, energetic, vibrant hospitality scene in Cape Town especially. And it actually just fueled the fire to come back home and open a bar back in Melbourne as well. So, it was really cool. It was only, unfortunately, we sort of had to call it quits after a year because financially it just wasn't making any sense for us anymore, mainly due to economic reasons. The economy in South Africa isn't great. I think by the time we converted all the profits from the first year of trade, we took the staff out to dinner and then that was it.
Oh, really?
Yeah. It wasn't a money-making project for me at all.
Okay.
If I had money myself, I would have been able to, personally keep it afloat for a few years, but I just didn't have that money. And if I was going to inject my own personal money more into a place, then I wanted to do that back in Melbourne.
Exactly.
So I kind of had to make a bit of a grown-up decision there, which was hard at the time because I had a really good, young, loyal team there that I had to, call them on Skype one day and say, "Hey guys, I'm sorry, we have to close the bar."
You actually closed it?
Yeah. So, the bar kept running after I left, but the whole team left with me, and then the partner that I had with it, he continued to run it for another, I think it was like 8-9 months. But yeah, then it closed. But now it's actually opened up. One of my really good friends who's a chef, he's actually taken over the space.
Okay.
And created a really cool street food style restaurant called the Commissary. His name's Wesley Randalls. If you're in Cape Town, anyone that's listening, go say hi to Wes and Jules that have opened that, and that's in the same space that we were in. So it's I'm glad that at least went to one of my friends.
So how do you go about managing different bars simultaneously by not being there?
You have to just have your systems in place. Have to be super organized and have systems in place. I've got more or less a bit of a template that I have already with running Operation Dagger. And a lot of it, even though it was a very different bar, we were all the way over in Cape Town and we were using South African ingredients and that sort of thing, the core of it and the template was still the same. So I basically more or less, copy and pasted that same template operationally for Operation Dagger to Cape Town. And the long-term plan was going to be to rotate the staff between the two because that was going to be the strength because they were essentially two different bars on different sides of the world. But when you stripped everything back, they were all running basically the same way. So then I could interchange staff. And it would have been really cool to be able to give, the Singapore guys an experience in Cape Town and vice versa, bring some of the South African guys to Singapore, which we did in the opening. Our opening head bartender we brought to Singapore to sort of work a week at Operation Dagger, and that was really cool. That's probably my only regret that I wasn't able to do that, with the whole team. But yeah, just going back to, how we did it, it's just you have to be organized and have that structure. I have a set time each week that I Skype with the team, no matter wherever I am in the world. I'll set that Tuesday 4 p.m. call. It's always with Singapore. And then it was always an hour later, it was with South Africa. Just to have that FaceTime, sort of face-to-face chat as well. And then every night getting a written report from my guys via email. And then I would, on email quite a lot, I think was the key. It's just a painful necessity. You have to focus you have to be committed to those communication processes. Yeah.
Talking about the staff rotation in between departments, in between bars, is this something that you are planning to do with Birdie as well?
I'd love to. Yes and no. What I really am looking forward to with Birdie is we want to develop a bit of a training program. So something that's very early in the early stages. We're not even open yet, but it's something that I really want to install into the bar. And that's a training program for outside people coming in. We get asked all the time at Dagger, can I come and work there for a week? And it's really hard in Singapore because of the visa restrictions, and it's super tough to do that. I look at, restaurants around the world, and, a restaurant like Noma is a perfect example. You'll have lunch or dinner at Noma, and then they'll give you a tour after your meal, and you'll go up into the prep area, and there'll be 25 chefs shelling peas. and they're all there on like a stagiaire program. They're all there working for free, basically.
yeah.
But they're there because they want to learn, right? And so they offer a template where, they come, they get fed, they have accommodation for them, and then it makes sense. In the bartending world, we don't have anything structured like that, So it's something that I'm really trying to work on a program. We're talking to a couple of brands at the moment to try and see if they can help out with it. And it's very much like that, a stagiaire program, very similar to a restaurant. So people would come, they spend time with us at Birdie, and there would be a set curriculum. So day 1, focusing on foraging. Day 2 is carbonation. Day 3 is distillation. Day 4 is fermentation. Day 5, it might be just going out to meet with our suppliers. So it's a really structured training program. And then at the end of it, whether it's a week or ideally I'd love to do it for a month, but obviously that comes logistically a little bit harder for people to take time off their work. So yeah, and then, they'll go away and, they would have learnt a lot in that period. Because that's another thing too, when people are saying, oh, can I just come and do a shift at the bar in Singapore? I instantly say to them, I was like, it's not that I don't want you to do that, but to be honest, you're not going to learn anything, in one shift. So I would really love to have this tailored program so I can really invest time into people and so they get the most out of it. Then in terms of rotating our staff into other bars, we loosely have an idea for maybe, this is going down in a second, third stage of Birdie, to have the concept of Birdie lends itself to being anywhere in the world, because the whole concept is like a bird flying to a new environment, it adapts. So there's no reason why we can't do a Birdie Singapore or a Birdie London or a Birdie Japan, and we adapt that same concept. And then if that happens, then I'd definitely love to rotate the staff, but I might be getting too ahead of myself there. I've got to open.
One step at a time,
I've got to
I guess.
open first.
Last question about Dagger. I think I found very interesting is the name. How did you come up with the name?
So Operation Dagger was something that just jumped out at me when I was researching the local area. We didn't want to just come to Singapore and just as foreigners introduce like a really foreign concept. We wanted to embrace the local culture and embrace the local history. So actually Singapore, the very clean, organized Singapore now, years ago, it wasn't so much. There was actually a very sort of dark, dirty sort of history, especially around the Chinatown area where we are. So it was actually Operation Dagger came from reading some old newspapers. And basically Operation Dagger was in 1956, I believe. And it was an operation or a blitz by the Singapore government and police force to eradicate the areas of like things like opium dens and brothels and that sort of thing. So they went into this area. There was a lot of secret gang societies and that sort of thing. So the police had Operation Dagger and they went in and they got rid of all this and cleaned up the area. So it was kind of cool when I read that. Obviously, Operation Dagger stands out. It's like a very impactful name. But it was kind of cool because it was like, at the time, the term or the style of a speakeasy bar was very, very popular. But I've always been quite conflicted with the term speakeasy because, like, for me, it's like, how can you be a speakeasy when you've got a liquor license? It's a bit of a gimmick sort of thing. So it was quite funny that Operation Dagger was actually also, just as much as I was against speakeasies, Operation Dagger was against the secret clubs and societies as well, and so it was kind of a bit of a tongue-in-cheek that we call ourselves Operation Dagger because we were kind of against that sort of secret society thing. I mean, we still get called a speakeasy all the time. We don't have a sign and that sort of thing, but I didn't want it to be our main focus. I think it was one thing that I really wanted with Operation Dagger is everything had to have a reason, whether it's the name of the bar or the design of the bar, or when you get asked the question why, there always has to be an answer for me.
How about the logos?
So that was a more direct influence from one of my favorite artists called Jean-Michel Basquiat. So in a nutshell, he started out as like a graffiti artist in the 80s in New York City. he was quite a poor graffiti artist at this time. You know, he spent a lot of time on the streets, and he actually used to incorporate what's known as hobo code or hobo language in a lot of his artwork. And so this hobo code is basically it was a way of communication with people on the streets. So if you and I were on the street and I found a place where I could get clean water, there was a symbol that meant clean water here. And then so you came past the next week, you see that symbol and you can get
clean water.
So that was kind of incorporating that language. And it was also out of an idea researching one of my favorite chefs called Ferran Adria with El Bulli. I found it really intriguing that he had basically for their mise en place, they had an organized system of codes or pictures, because all the chefs there working there were all from different parts of the world. So no one actually spoke a common tongue. So actually that's how they organized their mise en place, was by code. I really loved that. I thought it was so smart.
Awesome,
yeah. So I sort of started researching code, and then that came up, and then there was a reference to Jean-Michel Basquiat, which I've got a tattoo on my arm, which I've had for years, the crown, which is something he's famous for with painting on his artworks. And so our logo actually means if you scare the people that live here, they'll give you things to go away. If you intimidate these people, they'll give you something.
Oh, really?
So that was another tongue-in-cheek thing, because I found, like, after working in hospitality for so many years, I think it's quite easy to sometimes think that you're just giving people things to constantly try and make them happy. You know, it was always like, as long as the customer's happy, you give them something. So it was kind of cool. When I read that, I was like, yeah, that's cool. That's our logo. We're always giving people things to make sure they're happy.
Oh, that's a cool logo, though. I remember I've seen this seminar of Ferran Adria where he does this orange seminar in Harvard. It's there, like, saying to people, he's got an orange, right?
Yeah.
In front of his old classroom of, like, super smart students. And he's like, okay, can anyone tell me what this is? And they're all laughing. It's like, no, but like they're asking a serious question. What is this? And they're like, oh, it's an orange. I was like, yeah, I can see it's an orange, but what orange is it? And they're like, oh, that's a Californian orange. Like, I didn't ask you where the orange is from. I've asked you what orange it is. And then he goes on talking about oranges for like 2 hours.
Yeah, that's, I mean, he's, people often say, like, if you could, like, sit in a room, or if you could invite someone for dinner, anyone in the world, he'd be up the top of my list.
Yeah,
I'd love to sit and talk to him for hours. I think there's a lot of things that he did with El Bulli, and the food world wouldn't be the same without him. So I think bartenders can learn a lot from him and what he did at El Bulli. And not just him, actually. A lot of chefs at the top of their game. I think years ago there was like a huge divide between chefs and bartenders, and it was seen as we were doing two different things. And I look at it very differently. I think we're basically doing the same thing. I had a sit down and a chat with a chef here. His name's Dave Verhul from Embla here in Melbourne, an amazing chef. And we were sitting down talking about vermouths. He wants to start making some vermouths, very sort of like single origin, single ingredient vermouths, like a cherry vermouth or that sort of thing. And he was sort of asking me about that, and I was like, yeah, it's a great idea, So it's refreshing when you find people like that they're not exactly in the same industry, but they've got the same ideas. I think we're doing the same thing.
But also what I love about our industry at the moment is that I've noticed that things are getting more and more casual. And I think bartending is becoming more casual. I worked at the American bar for 4 years, and despite the fact that it looks like a very stiff bar from the outside, it's actually very casual in the way that people interact with each other at the bar. Still a bar, right? But also restaurants are becoming more and more casual. I think fine dining is getting very, very casual. I was sitting at the restaurant here in Melbourne, and I was sitting at the counter where the kitchen is, and the chef was like chit-chatting to me and like giving me stuff to try, and I thought, that's a bartender's chat, is it?
Yeah. No, in recent years that's changed a lot in the chef side of things. You can't be a chef anymore these days and just be in the back cooking and not talk to people. You have to be it's a multifaceted job. You have to be, good with people. You have to be able to, especially these days, you've got shows like MasterChef. You have to, speak well in front of a group, and it's quite a challenging job. You have to wear many hats, so to speak. But I feel like just as much as bartenders can learn from chefs quite a lot, I think, chefs are learning a lot from bartenders as well, especially, I look at the Japanese sushi chef as like the ultimate chef, because they're basically a chef and a bartender at the same time. They're in front of you at the counter. There's nowhere to hide. They have to, and quite often the Japanese style is to be very, what's the word? Not stern, but like quite reserved and not saying much or whatever. But quite often it can be an amazing experience. Aki's father is a sushi chef here in Melbourne, and it's amazing sitting there having sushi made from him, because he's right there. It's not like he's making it in the back and you never see him. And I always thought that was a very strong similarity between bartenders and sushi chefs. It's very similar.
Let's talk a little bit about Birdie. So first of all, you must be quite excited to be back here in Australia, right?
Yeah, it's amazing. It's become home for me now, and especially now just having our first child, it's really something that's kind of like, well, it's me kind of settling down and choosing a place that it's like, okay, this is where I'm going to be.
Talk to us a little bit about the concept of Birdie.
Yep, so it's quite a simple one actually. So the name Birdie comes from just like a bird will adapt to its environment and naturally evolve. If it flies to a new location, it will evolve to that location and start, maybe its diet might change, or it will develop over the course of many years. It will develop, claws or webbed feet to swim, or, it will just adapt to its environment. So that was kind of what I want to do in terms of myself and the bar. I want it to be always evolving and always adapting. And I want it to be telling a story of the place that we're in. Like we were saying earlier, Australia and also Victoria and Melbourne is such an amazing place for so many reasons. But the main one is it's so seasonal, and you've got such a huge exposure of so many different products, produce-wise. And it's not even just like indigenous things. There's like things now in Victoria that are being grown. Like there's some amazing yuzu being grown here. I'm getting some really amazing vanilla beans and coffee from northern Queensland as well.
Oh.
So there's a lot of stuff that people don't necessarily think that are grown in Australia, and we've been growing it in recent years, and it's really, really a high quality because we've got such a diverse climate here. So yeah, I want to really showcase that. And so one sort of passion of mine is, well, food and drink is a passion of mine, obviously, but traveling. And so whenever I travel, I want to taste whatever is local. Earlier this year, I went to Italy for the first time, and I remember I landed in the airport and we were sitting there waiting for Denzel Heath from Muti to arrive, because we were there for like an Italian bar show. We're sitting in the airport waiting for Denzel to arrive, and Shane Eaton was the guy that brought us over for that. And he said, okay, while we're waiting here, let me go get you a beer. And I was like, yeah, cool, no worries. And I didn't even think. And he went off to the lounge or whatever to get a beer, and he brings back like I think it was a Pilsner Urquell, or it was a Czech beer or something. Yeah. And I was like, what's this? Where's the Peroni? Like, I'm in Italy. I don't want a Czech beer. So that, I was just joking around. I think he eventually did get a Peroni.
Oh, no way.
Oh, and actually, yeah, that's right.
Poor guy.
No, but he went and got a Peroni, and the Peroni came back and it was warm. And he's like, oh no, let me take it back. It's warm. I said, no. In Italy, I'd rather drink a warm Peroni than a cold beer from Czech, because I think it's just... traveling, that's the beauty of traveling, right? You get to taste new things, and it always tastes better from the place it is.
For some reason it does, right?
Yeah. So yeah, I want to focus on what is good about Melbourne, what is, and I want to create an experience. So especially for people, if they're coming from London or wherever, and they're coming all the way down to Melbourne, I want to give them an experience that they can't get anywhere else in the world. And they're going to go home and go, oh my God, like, I have to go all the way back there to get that, That to me is special. It came from a very early experience having a meal at a restaurant called Faviken. The chef there is Magnus Nielsen. He's like one of my idols. He does some amazing things. But I went to Sweden. I basically had this meal, and it changed my whole perspective on things. Basically, he only uses produce that's grown on his property. He'll maybe only use things that he hunts for within like a 5-kilometer radius and that sort of thing. And it was the first real time I actually appreciated or got a sense of terroir and provenance, and it really affected me a lot. And it's something with Singapore that I've been wanting to do for a while, and it kind of frustrated me for a little bit that, you know, I couldn't do as much as I could. Like, we use some local honeys and that sort of thing in Singapore, but in terms of doing it across the board, it's quite a challenge. So coming back to Melbourne and just having all this local stuff is amazing. And so, I'm really looking forward to it.
How big is the bar going to be?
So we're, space-wise, we're 125 square meters, but for people that can't really convert that in their heads, I know I can't, we're going to be 60 seats.
Okay.
And we're going to have one bar and kitchen that sort of serves the majority of the bar area, and then we're going to have one, we're calling it the Avery, Birdie Avery, which is basically a glassed off section with another bar in there that will mainly serve as like our lab, but we'll do little tasting events in there as well.
Like a private dining room, so to speak.
Sort of, yeah. So we'll do like chef collaborations and that sort of thing in there, but majority of the time it will operate as our lab where we're sort of developing new drinks.
Will you be serving food?
Yeah, we'll have quite a strong food focus. Just with the produce that we can get, it just makes sense. I think, especially in Melbourne is a very much a food city. You can't really get away with opening a bar without having a decent food offering. It'll be a short menu of probably about 10 food items. Predominantly will be plant-based, and we'll probably only have maybe 2 protein, maybe 3 max. So we'll have like 1 seafood dish and 1 meat dish. But when we have that seafood or meat, it'll be a very strong focus of knowing where it's from. It'll be from a very small producer and working very closely with a farmer, because we want to have that sort of sustainability angle as well. And I like the idea of, you know, introducing bar snacks or food that goes with drinks. It doesn't always have to be fried chicken, you know?
Yeah, I agree. Absolutely.
It can be vegetable based and still really delicious.
But the main focus will, of course, be cocktails. When it comes to the cocktails, is it still going to be 100% focused on what you can source from around yourself, like the bar?
Yeah. It'll be focusing on the seasons, what we can get, and we'll use a lot of preservation techniques. So at the moment, there's like lily pilly that's just starting to grow. Lily pilly, it's also known as rye berry in Australia. So it's a little pink berry that grows specifically in Australia, and it's kind of got the texture of like a pear, but it's almost like a bitter sweet sort of flavor as well. That's starting to grow at the moment, so we've been picking that and pickling and preserving or drying. So even though we'll be a very strong seasonal focus, quite often we'll have a drink that will be serving last year's lily pilly with this year's jasmine or something like that. So it's kind of, I guess I want to sort of focus or show people that, you know, even though we're focusing on the seasons, there's a lot of techniques that you can focus on preserving these ingredients as well.
I think it's a quite cool thing, because if I look back at, for instance, my granddad and grandma, they literally lived with whatever they could get from around themselves, and there was a lot of preserving involved, right?
Yeah. It's smart, right? Like, use these things all year round. Making jam is like a great example, you know. So when you have the fresh fruit, you know, eating the fresh fruit, there's nothing better. But to be able to preserve it so you can use it all year round, you know, to make it into a jam or a preserve it makes perfect sense. Yeah, especially with bartending too. Like, alcohol is like an obvious preservative. You know, you can preserve a lot of things in alcohol. So using not only those techniques but pickling and that sort of thing is. It's a lot of fun because you can get a lot of different flavor profiles out of the same ingredient. There's one drink that we're going to be putting on, and it's basically just focusing on the one ingredient, and that's pears. So when we have fresh pears, we're going to be fermenting them. Oh, they're amazing. But we're also using the same ingredient, but whole heap of different ways. So we'll be using the fresh pear juice, but then we'll also be fermenting it, which obviously changes the flavor and the complexity of it. But then we'll also be smoking the pears and distilling the pears as well and pickling the pears. And all those techniques will be rolled into one drink. So it's basically one ingredient, but the flavors are really diverse. So kind of getting people to think a little bit more when they're thinking about drinks, thinking more produce related rather than focusing on what spirit it is, whether it's rum or whiskey or whatever.
Speaking of spirits, are you planning to focus on local spirits, or do you think you'll have some sort of international selection?
No, it'll just be 100% local. Yeah.
Okay.
So, for instance, we won't have tequila in the bar. It just doesn't really make sense for us to be focusing on so many local things and then, make you a Tommy's margarita, even if it is with, local limes. I think that's, for me personally, that would be like me only going halfway. I want to go all the way with this. So yeah, we're working, and it can be a challenge, but it's actually been really exciting working with a lot of local producers. We're working with a local vermouth company called Maiden Eye Vermouth. So we're developing a seasonal expression with them. So we'll change the vermouth every season. So the vermouth that we're going to be opening with, we're developing now, but it'll be very sort of more fruit driven. There's a big focus on using an ingredient called strawberry gum leaf, which is a type of eucalypt, but it's quite fruity. And we're creating this vermouth to be enjoyed like with a tonic or a soda in a highball. But then when summer comes along, we'll develop the vermouth and change the flavor profile. We're doing a similar thing with a gin with a local a distiller from South Australia called Applewood. And so the gin that we're hoping to open with will be a smoked Davidson plum Old Tom gin. And so then we'll open with that the first 3 months, and we'll also sell that retail as well for people that, if they like the gin, they can take a bottle home. So if they're coming from London or wherever, they can take a little slice of Birdie with them. And then we'll change it all the time. So it'll become like a limited release sort of thing. So that's been really cool for me to be able to work with different people on these things, and even down to like working with local ceramic artists to make ceramics for us. It's cool. It works both ways. I'm excited and love working with these people, and, you can see that they're enjoying it as well.
We had this Japanese chef, his name is Endo-san, and he was the first executive chef of Zuma, actually. Oh. And now he's opening his own restaurant. Then for a short period of time, when I was still back in London, he had a pop-up in the hotel where I worked for like a month or so. So for the first 3 days of the week, he would go fishing, and then we bring that fish back to the hotel and cook for like the 3 days, 1 day off, repeat, right?
Amazing.
And one of the cool things that he told me is that all his china ware was made in Japan by a local ceramic guy, right? Yeah. And he never gave this guy any brief. He said, whatever you feel like do it, and then ship it over to me. And then he was showing me some of the things that he received, like a huge, very weirdly shaped bowl. And he's like, what do you use that for? And it's like, I have no idea,
That's actually, that's, it's funny you say that. Like, a lot of the stuff that I've done in the past, and especially like if I use Operation Dagger for an example, I think in the process, in terms of collaborating or, outsourcing someone to make something for us, let's say ceramic, I think I was very controlling of that process, and I wanted it to look a certain way or that sort of thing. With Birdie, I've actually had the complete different mentality, and it's basically been the same process of, okay, this is what I want to do. Just go for it. Yeah. Just go for it. Especially with these guys, Applewood, they make amazing products on their own. I just sort of, float an idea by them and say, but, you just do it. I obviously the one prerequisite that I would like to have is that I just want to be involved in the process somehow. But I think if you're a bit too controlling, you restrict someone else's creativity. So it's really cool. And I mean, sometimes it's a bit of a risk because you don't know what's going to be made. But I think if you choose the right people, then the quality is going to be there anyway. But even just down to like the design of the concept of the name of Birdie and everything, we talked to friends of ours who are local designers here in Melbourne called Drooly Noted. And we just said, okay, here's the concept. We want to do local things. We want to adapt to our environment. Go. And they just came up with the whole thing of
that's awesome.
Birdie, and it was really cool. Like, and it was, I think now with that mentality, it enables Birdie to grow into something that I couldn't just do by myself. You know, myself and Aki doing it, we would only go down one road. Whereas by opening it up to other people, it then evolves into something greater than we couldn't do on our own. So,
have you had any challenges coming back here, like in terms of adjusting, or do you think that your service style will have to adjust to the local market, or do you think it's a bit copy paste?
Well, it remains to be seen.
No, right?
We'll wait and see when we open.
Month one,
You come talk to me in a few months. I'll be like, oh, dude, I'm really struggling. No, I think it's a good time for me to come back to Melbourne. Melbourne's a great city, and especially for food and drink. However, I think for a little while in terms of bars, and people might disagree with me, but from my perspective, in terms of cocktail bars, there's probably been too many of the same style of bars opening. It's not to say that they're not great bars, but I think it's like it's the same thing over and over again, just getting rehashed, and it becomes a little bit stagnant. You know, don't get me wrong, the quality is still there, but it's not, introducing anything new. And so that's what's perfect for me coming in and having such a different approach and a different concept is, it allows me to do my own thing, and not feel the pressure of 5 or 6 other bars doing the same thing. If I was to come back and open like a very classic orientated cocktail bar, there'd be a huge amount of pressure because there's so many other bars doing it really well. A case in point is like a bar called the Everly in Melbourne. It's an amazing bar that makes some amazing drinks, and like, why would I compete with that? It doesn't make sense.
Pick your fights, right?
Yeah, so it's great, for me to come in. I feel like it's going to be great for me, but it's also we're going to be able to offer something to Melbourne and contribute to the scene as a whole, which is great. In terms of, like I say, in terms of like service and that sort of thing, it probably remains to be seen. But I don't know. I think we're going to have a very kind of similar approach to a lot of the restaurants and wine bars in Melbourne, and that's having a very strong quality, high quality product, but with a relaxed style and a relaxed service. Yeah, the main thing with Birdie is I want it to become like a second home for my family. I want it to be the place where my son can come, and it's extension of his own home. So that will influence the style of bar that we're going to be. It's not the sort of bar that we're going to be encouraging shots and late night, just getting wasted. That's not my interest. We're going to be open from 10 a.m. actually, serving coffee and that sort of thing as well. No. So it's actually the staff, the people that that we're attracting that want to work for us. You can see that they want to work for us for the right reasons as well. Maybe there's they've been working in bars till 5 a.m. for so long that they just want something different. They want something a little bit more wholesome and something that they can sort of dig their teeth into and learn a little bit more. And with our approach of our focus being on the produce more, on the seasons and that sort of thing, it's not just about getting people drunk.
You mentioned that when you opened Operation Dagger, you were there pretty much every day. You opened 2 bars simultaneously. You mentioned that you need to be on your emails and things like that. What is it that you do to unwind? What is it that helps you, say, sort of drop the mic and take your own time?
If I could choose what I would ultimately do to unwind, it would be to go for a surf. I don't get to do that very often these days. It's something that I'm working on that I really want to try and get back to. That was a huge part of me growing up was surfing. I grew up on the ocean, so it was a huge part of my life. My childhood friends are still my best friends now, and I met them because of surfing. I have a very tight-knit group of friends that they're not even in the industry as well, so it's really cool for me. When I go back to my hometown, I can just focus on hanging out with mates and going surfing. There's nothing industry related, at all. So that would be my ultimate. That's when I'm really, off duty. But on a day-to-day basis, just simple things like, at the moment, just spending time with my son is like the ultimate. It's really cool. Even if it's just an hour before I head out during the day, and then maybe at night, just he's only just turned 1, so he's in a really cool period of his life now. We watched like this morning I turned on like David Attenborough, is it Planet Earth? Yeah. And so he's like sitting there watching the fish and that with me. And but yeah, that's cool for me. And then just spending time with Aki, just cooking at home, bottle of wine is great. I love being outdoors, that sort of thing. So yeah, I tend not to go to so many bars these days because I find it, even though I enjoy it, it's kind of, I find it hard to switch off. Even if I'm at a bar or a restaurant and I'm enjoying it, it's still work for me because I'm constantly, I find it hard to switch my mind off. So when I'm trying to relax, I try and remove myself from anything bar or drinks related.
So tell us a little bit. You've got 2 people that I think are very, I wouldn't say similar, but, like very relevant to what you do, which are Alex and Matt.
Mm.
What kind of relationship do you have with them, and how do you make sure that your concepts and drinks don't clash with each other?
Well, I think first of all, I'm super grateful to be able to call the 2 of those mates. Like, not only are they good friends, and they're just good mates, but they just so happen to be 2 of the most influential guys in my chosen industry. So, in terms of clashing, probably Matt and I, our stuff clashes a little more.
I mean, he just moved to Australia, for God's sake.
Yeah, he did. That's a good point. No, we're always having a laugh and, taking the piss out of each other. It's like, oh, yeah. No, I was in Sydney 2 weeks ago. I went to Scout, had an amazing time, really cool drinks. And there's a couple of drinks he brought out, basically the whole menu, because we had like an hour before we went to dinner together. And Aki and I had Bronson, and I was driving, so I couldn't really drink so much. So he basically brought out the whole menu, and I had like tastes of everything. And I felt,
that's cool.
Well, it was cool, but I felt bad for the bartenders there. They're making all these drinks that I take one sip off and then give back. So I hope they know that I enjoyed it, and I'm
sure they do.
But yeah, there was a drink that came out, and Matt makes a comment. It's like, "Oh yeah, this is the one that you copied me on." And there's always comments like that. But it's all in good humor. I think I mean those guys are a constant inspiration to me. I'd feel very honored if they said that I was an inspiration to them. But I think we all focus on different things. Yeah, I don't know. I've learned a lot from not only Matt but Alex, but not so much, not always just about drinks. I think it was a couple of years ago when I started doing a lot more trips around to do guest shifts or doing a seminar and that sort of thing. I was a bit lost in terms of I didn't really know how to approach that on the business side of things to make it worth my while, because I started thinking, I'm getting offers to do a lot of these trips and that sort of thing. But in all honesty, if I did a trip to London, I would have to take time from my business, and financially it was tough, So I had to try and make it worth my while without, I didn't want to come across as too arrogant and be like, okay, you can pay me 10,000 whatever a day, because, and I didn't know how to price it, because you don't get taught that, no one says, okay, this is how much the going rate is. So obviously, Alex was the first person I sung out to, and I said, oh, what should I be telling people? What do you think? And he put it very simply, and in a really cool way for me to understand. And it was, and then I followed his advice, and I have for years now, and it's really helped me. So yeah, being friends with a guy like Alex has helped me in more ways than one. So yeah, I'm forever in debt to both those guys. They've been very good to me. Alex also was a very positive influence on the success of Operation Dagger. We were doing okay, and there was people appreciating what we did, but I remember a very distinct change when Alex came and had some drinks, and I think he mentioned in an article or something that he really enjoyed it and it was the best drinks he tried in a long time. Mm-hmm. Instantly overnight we were busy. A guy like Alex has that effect on the industry, on businesses, right? Yeah. On businesses. So I'm forever grateful for that. So
how did you guys come up with the Like-Minded Creatures program?
I guess it came about. Matt and Alex were two guys that I really wanted to thank them for for helping me out over the years. So for Operation Dagger, we had never had any guest shifts. We had never had anyone from the outside in to the bar. We'd always focused on our own thing. And it wasn't because that we, didn't want other people in. It was just because we were doing something so different for Singapore, we wanted to introduce that to Singapore. We didn't want to confuse things by, 4 days a week, this is us. And then one day of the week, we had someone visiting, coming in, making different drinks. And I find that sometimes quite difficult unless you've got a designated space that's separate to the bar that you can do a guest shift but still offer your same core menu. It's quite confusing for the guest.
It is.
And especially when you've got, who knows, you might have someone from the other side of the world that's come and they're only in the city for one night. It's the one night that they can come and see you and they can't get your drinks because you've got a guest shift. I think business-wise, it doesn't make sense. So I didn't do that for a long time. And then Singapore Cocktail Week, we decided, okay, on a Monday night that we're normally closed, let's open up and have this like party. So it was just me, Alex, and Matt. And I was like, okay, well, what am I going to call it? And I don't know how. It was just like, we're all quite similar. We're different creatures in our own right, but we're like-minded. There's a lot of the same processes. When the three of us are together, we're all talking about the same sort of thing, and it's really cool. So yeah, like-minded creatures made sense. And not to mention, like Matt has this alter ego of the talented Mr. Fox. My nickname's Wookie. For obvious reasons, and then Alex is the panda, right? So it was kind of, we were all creatures, and it just happened like that.
It's very cool. Last question I asked to everyone before we close it. What would be your last drink if you could choose it?
My last drink? Probably a glass of water. I can never get enough. It's probably a bit boring, but I can never get enough water.
I know, right?
I'm like a fish. I think growing up by the ocean, I say this to Aki all the time, I feel like sometimes I'm drying up unless I've been in the ocean. And it's, I'm constantly at home just like drinking water.
There you have it. Nice and simple. Thank you very much for your time. It was awesome talking to you.
Thanks for having me, man. Cheers.
We hope you enjoyed our chat with Luke. We are Unjiggered_media on Instagram, and you can follow our personal accounts at mmariotti89 for Michele, Alex J. Murphy for myself, and Adrian Bessa for Adrian. Thank you for listening.